keycard slid into the lock with a soft beep, and I pushed open the door to room 27. The hallway behind me stretched long and silent, dimmed lights flickering every few seconds like a heartbeat losing rhythm. It was nearly 2 in the morning, and the hotel felt abandoned, though I knew other guests were sleeping behind those identical wooden doors. I'd been driving for 16 hours straight, chasing a job interview in a city I'd never been to before. This place was the only option within my budget. A roadside hotel with peeling paint and a neon sign that buzzed like dying flies. The clerk at the front desk barely looked at me when I checked in, just slid the key across the counter and muttered something about breakfast ending at 9. The room smelled like old carpet and lemon cleaner that couldn't quite mask something underneath, something stale. I dropped my bag on the chair near the window and pulled back the heavy curtains. Outside, the parking lot was empty, except for my car and a rusted pickup truck, 3 spaces down. Beyond that, nothing but darkness and the distant glow of a gas station sign. I needed sleep. My interview was in 6 hours. The bathroom light buzzed when I flicked it on, casting harsh fluorescent white across cracked tiles. I splashed water on my face, avoiding my reflection. I looked as tired as I felt. When I turned off the faucet, I heard it, a soft sound, almost like breathing, coming from somewhere in the room. I stood perfectly still, water dripping from my chin. The sound stopped. Just the pipes, I whispered to myself. Old buildings made noise. Everyone knew that. I changed into my sleep clothes and climbed into bed, pulling the thin comforter up to my chin. The mattress sagged in the middle, and the pillows smelled faintly of someone else's shampoo. I closed my eyes, forcing my mind to go blank, but sleep wouldn't come. The room felt wrong somehow, like the walls were watching. Then I heard it again, that breathing sound, slow and rhythmic, like someone sleeping deeply. My eyes snapped open. The room was dark except for a sliver of light from the parking lot creeping through the gap in the curtains. I turned my head slowly, scanning the shadows. The closet door hung slightly open, just a crack, revealing nothing but blackness inside. "Hello?" My voice came out smaller than I intended. Silence. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. The screen's glow blinding in the darkness. 2:17 a.m. I opened the flashlight app and swept the beam across the room. Empty chair, closed bathroom door, half-open closet, nothing. I was being paranoid, exhaustion playing tricks on my mind. I turned off the phone and settled back into the pillow, pulling the blanket tighter. The breathing had stopped. Maybe it really was just pipes, or the air conditioning cycling on and off. I let my eyes drift closed again, my body finally relaxing into the mattress. That's when the closet door creaked fully open. My heart stopped. I didn't move, didn't breathe, just stared at the darkness spilling out from that closet like ink in water. Nothing emerged, no figure, no shape, just that open door that had definitely been closed a moment ago. I grabbed my phone again, hands shaking, and pointed the flashlight directly at the closet. Empty hangers swayed slightly, though there was no breeze. The shelf above held nothing but dust. I got out of bed slowly, my bare feet hitting the cold carpet, and walked toward the closet. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I needed to see, needed to know. I reached the closet and shined the light into every corner. Nothing, just an empty space that smelled like mothballs and something else, something rotten and sweet. I slammed the door shut and pushed the chair in front of it. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely grip the chair back. This was ridiculous. I was a grown adult, afraid of an empty closet like a child. But something felt deeply, fundamentally wrong about this room. I climbed back into bed, keeping the phone flashlight on, and pointed at the closet. The chair sat firmly in place. Nothing could open that door now. I watched it for what felt like hours, my eyes burning from the strain, until exhaustion finally dragged me under. I woke to knocking, loud, insistent knocking that pulled me from a dreamless sleep. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, and I blinked against the brightness, disoriented. The knocking continued. I checked my phone, 8:43 a.m. "Housekeeping," a woman's voice called from the hallway. "I'm still here," I shouted back, my voice hoarse. The knocking stopped. I heard the cleaning cart roll away, wheels squeaking down the hallway. I sat up and looked at the closet. The chair was still in place, exactly where I'd left it. Morning light made the room look different, less threatening, almost sad in its decay. I felt foolish about my panic last night. Just exhaustion and an unfamiliar place. That's all it was. I showered quickly, the water lukewarm at best, and dressed in my interview clothes. As I packed my bag, I noticed something on the nightstand I hadn't seen before. A small note, handwritten on hotel stationery. My blood went cold as I picked it up and read the words, "You shouldn't have opened your eyes." The handwriting was shaky, desperate. I looked around the room, my heart hammering in my chest. When had this appeared? I'd been alone all night. I'd checked every corner, every shadow. My hands shook as I crumpled the note and shoved it in my pocket. I needed to leave. Now, I grabbed my bag and rushed the door, yanking it open. The hallway was empty and bright, sunlight streaming through windows at the far end. I practically ran to the front desk, my interview forgotten, just needing to get out of this place. A different clerk stood behind the counter, a young woman with tired eyes. She looked up as I approached. "Checking out of 2037? She asked, her voice flat. "Yes." "How did you know my room number?" She glanced at her computer screen, then back at me with an expression I couldn't read. "You're the only guest on the second floor. How was your stay?" I stared at her. The only guest. All those doors I'd passed last night, I'd assumed people were sleeping behind them. But if I was alone on that entire floor, who left the note in my room? I asked, pulling the crumpled paper from my pocket. Her face went pale. She took the note from me and read it, her hands starting to shake. When she looked up, there was real fear in her eyes. "We don't use this stationery anymore," she whispered. "We switched companies 3 years ago." She turned the note over, showing me a watermark I hadn't noticed before. "This is from before the incident." "What incident?" She glanced toward the back office, then leaned closer. "A guest died in 27. 4 years ago. We found them 3 days after checkout time. The door was locked from the inside. The chair pushed against the closet. They left notes all over the room, saying something was watching them, something that wouldn't stop breathing." The room spun. I gripped the counter to steady myself. "We're not supposed to rent that room anymore," she continued, her voice barely audible. "It's flagged in the system." "How did you?" She clicked her mouse several times, her face going from pale to grey. "Oh God. The system glitched last night. The night clerk. He's new. He wouldn't have known." I didn't wait to hear more. I threw my keycard on the counter and walked out into the bright morning sun, my legs weak, my mind reeling. As I reached my car, I looked back at the building. Second floor, end of the hall, room 27. The curtains I'd opened that morning were closed again, though I could see movement behind them. A shadow, standing perfectly still, watching me leave. I drove away and never looked back. But sometimes late at night I still hear it. That slow, rhythmic breathing. And I remember the note's warning, the words I didn't understand until it was almost too late. "You shouldn't have opened your eyes, because whatever was in that closet, whatever waited in the darkness of room 2037, it only moved when you were watching." The hotel was nicer than I expected for a business conference. Clean hallways, modern decor, and a lobby that actually smelled like fresh flowers instead of industrial cleaner. I checked in around 7 p.m., exhausted from the flight and ready to collapse into bed before tomorrow's early presentation. "You're in room 412, the clerk said with a practiced smile. "4th floor, turn right off the elevator. Ice machine and vending are at the end of the hall." I thanked her and made my way up, my rolling suitcase clicking rhythmically across the polished floors. The elevator dinged softly as it rose, smooth and quiet. Everything about this place felt corporate and safe. Predictable, exactly what I needed after a long day. Room 412 was at the corner, right where the hallway turned. I slid my keycard and pushed inside, immediately kicking off my shoes and dropping my bag on the luggage rack. The room was standard, but comfortable, with a king bed, a desk, and a window overlooking the city lights below. I could hear the faint murmur of traffic, muffled and distant. I was about to order room service when I heard voices through the wall. The room next to mine, 414. Two people, it sounded like, having a conversation. I couldn't make out words, just the low rumble of voices. One seemed to be speaking urgently, the other responding in shorter bursts. I thought nothing of it. Hotels had thin walls. It came with the territory. I ordered a sandwich and fries, ate while watching mindless TV, and eventually got ready for bed. As I brushed my teeth, I heard it again. The voices from next door, they seemed louder now, more intense. One voice was definitely arguing, the tone sharp and angry, the other was quieter, almost pleading. I rinsed my mouth and listened. Should I call the front desk? It didn't sound violent, just heated. Couples fought. It happened. I decided to mind my business and went to bed. The room was dark except for the glow of the alarm clock. 11:42 p.m. I closed my eyes and tried to ignore the muffled arguing that continued through the wall. Eventually, it faded and I drifted into an uneasy sleep. I woke to silence. Complete, absolute silence. My eyes opened in the darkness, and I lay perfectly still, trying to figure out what had pulled me from sleep. The clock read 2:14 a.m. The arguing had stopped. In fact, I couldn't hear anything at all. No traffic, no air conditioning hum, no sound from neighboring rooms. Just oppressive, heavy silence. Then I heard it, a soft knock on the wall. The wall I shared with room 44. 3 slow, deliberate knocks, like someone using their knuckles right against the surface. I stared at the wall in the darkness, my heart starting to pound. The knocks came again, same rhythm. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cutting through the silence. No response. Just another series of knocks, this time a little lower on the wall, like whoever was doing it had moved down. I sat up in bed, pulling the blanket around my shoulders. This was bizarre. Why would someone knock on the wall instead of just knocking on my door or calling the front desk if they needed something? I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and turned on the flashlight, pointing it at the wall as if that would help. The knocking stopped. I waited, my breathing loud in my ears, but nothing happened. Minutes passed. The silence returned, thick and suffocating. I was about to lie back down when I heard movement in the hallway. Footsteps, slow and measured, walking past my door. They stopped right outside. I held my breath, watching the thin line of light at the bottom of my door. A shadow passed across it, then stopped. Someone was standing there, directly outside my room. I could hear breathing now, raspy and wet, like someone struggling with congestion. My hands trembled as I held the phone. Should I call security? What would I even say? Someone standing outside my door. They weren't trying to get in, they were just standing there. The shadow moved again, but instead of walking away, it seemed to shift closer, like whoever it was had pressed themselves against my door. I heard a soft sound, almost like whispering, but too low to make out words. My entire body went rigid with fear. "Who's there?" I shouted, trying to sound brave. The breathing stopped. The shadow at the bottom of the door disappeared. Footsteps moved away quickly, almost running, fading down the hallway until I couldn't hear them anymore. I sat frozen in bed for several minutes, my heart hammering, before I finally got up and approached the door. I looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty and bright, fluorescent lights humming overhead. Nothing moved. I chain-locked the door and wedged the desk chair under the handle for good measure. There was no way I was sleeping now. I turned on every light in the room and sat on the bed, phone in hand, waiting for morning. At 6 a.m., exhausted and wired on adrenaline, I called the front desk. "This is room 4012, I said when someone answered. "I need to report a disturbance last night. Someone was knocking on my wall and standing outside my door around 2 a.m. There was a pause on the other end. "I'm very sorry to hear that, sir. Did you see who it was?" "No, but they were in the room next to mine, room 44. They were arguing earlier in the evening, and then the knocking started." Another pause, longer this time. "Sir, room 404 is vacant. It's been empty for the past 3 days. We have a plumbing issue in that unit, so it's not available for guests. My blood turned to ice. That's impossible. I heard people in there, multiple times, voices, arguing. I assure you, the room is locked and unoccupied. But I can send security up to check if you'd like. Yes, I said quickly. Please. 20 minutes later, there was a knock on my door. I looked through the peephole and saw a security guard in uniform. I opened the door, keeping the chain on. You reported a disturbance? He asked, his voice professional but kind. I explained everything while he listened patiently. When I finished, he nodded and pulled out a master key card. Let's take a look next door. I followed him to room 414, staying close. He swiped the card and pushed open the door. The room was dark and cold, the air stale and still. He flicked on the light. The room was completely empty. No furniture except the bed, which was stripped bare, showing a stained mattress. The bathroom door hung open, revealing disconnected pipes and tools scattered on the floor. Dust covered every surface. It was clear no one had been in this room for days, maybe weeks. As you can see, the guard said, it's under maintenance. No one could have been in here. I stared at the room, my mind unable to process what I was seeing. But I heard them. I heard voices, arguing, and then the knocking on the wall. The guard looked at me with an expression that was somewhere between pity and concern. Sometimes sounds carry through the ventilation system. Could have been from another floor, another room entirely. Old hotels can play tricks like that. I wanted to believe him, but I knew what I'd heard. And the footsteps in the hallway, the breathing outside my door, that shadow, none of that could be explained by echoing voices. The guard walked me back to my room and offered to move me to a different floor. I accepted immediately, packed my things in record time, and followed him to the elevator. As we waited for the doors to open, I glanced back down the hallway. Room 414's door was closed, but through the crack at the bottom, I could see movement, a shadow pacing back and forth, like someone trapped inside, walking the same path over and over again. The elevator dinged, and I stepped inside without looking back. I checked out early, claiming a family emergency. The presentation could wait. As I loaded my suitcase into my rental car, I looked up at the 4th floor windows. Room 414 was dark, but I could swear I saw a face pressed against the glass, pale and watching. I never found out what was in that room, but sometimes, late at night in my own home, I hear it. That soft knocking through the walls, 3 deliberate taps, and I know, somehow, it followed me back. The historic Grandview Hotel rose 12 stories above the downtown streets, its Art Deco facade lit by warm amber lights. I'd always wanted to stay here since I was a kid, drawn by the stories of old Hollywood stars and jazz musicians who'd walked these halls in the 1930s. Finally, on my 30th birthday, I'd saved enough to book a weekend getaway. The lobby took my breath away. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and walls covered in black and white photographs of the hotel's golden age. I checked in with a sense of excitement, the kind I hadn't felt in years. "You're in room 107, the clerk said, handing me an actual metal key, not a key card. 10th floor. We maintain the original style in our historic rooms. I think you'll love it." I thanked her and made my way to the elevator, admiring the polished brass and wood paneling. Everything felt like stepping back in time. The elevator operator, an older gentleman in a burgundy uniform, smiled as I stepped inside. 10th floor, I said. He pulled the brass lever, and we ascended with the smooth mechanical whir of old machinery. "First time at the Grandview?" he asked. "Yes. I've been looking forward to this for years." He nodded slowly. "It's a special place. Just remember, if you see a do not disturb sign on a door, respect it. Some of our longtime guests value their privacy." I thought it was an odd thing to say, but smiled politely. Of course. The elevator opened onto a long hallway with burgundy carpet and brass wall sconces casting warm light. The air smelled like old wood and lavender. I found room 107 near the middle of the hall, slid the key into the lock, and stepped inside. The room was stunning. High ceilings, a four-poster bed with heavy velvet curtains, an antique writing desk by the window. Everything had been preserved or restored to period accuracy. I felt like I'd walked onto a movie set. I dropped my bag and immediately went to the window, looking out over the city as the sun began to set. This was going to be a perfect weekend. I spent the evening exploring the hotel, dining in the restaurant, having drinks at the Art Deco bar. By the time I returned to my room around 11, I was pleasantly tired and ready for bed. I changed into my pajamas, brushed my teeth in the pedestal sink, and climbed under the heavy duvet. Sleep came easily in that comfortable bed, but I woke sometime in the middle of the night to a strange sound. Music. Faint jazz music, the kind with crackling static like an old record player. It was coming from somewhere in the hallway. I lay still, listening. It wasn't loud, just barely audible through my door. Probably another guest, I thought, though it seemed odd for someone to be playing music at this hour. I checked my phone, 3:22 a.m. The music continued for a few more minutes, then stopped abruptly. Silence returned, and I drifted back to sleep. The next morning, I woke refreshed and spent the day exploring the city. When I returned to the hotel that evening, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Across the hall from my room, on the door to room 108, hung a "Do Not Disturb" sign. It was old-fashioned, made of heavy cardboard with faded gold lettering. I remembered what the elevator operator had said. Some long-time guests valued their privacy. That night, after another lovely dinner, I returned to my room around 10. As I walked down the hallway, I noticed the "Do Not Disturb" sign was still on room 108. In fact, as I got closer, I realized the door was slightly ajar, maybe an inch, just enough to see darkness beyond. I paused. Should I say something? What if the guest was in danger? But the elevator operator's words echoed in my mind. Respect the privacy. I decided it wasn't my business, and let myself into my own room. I tried to read in bed, but couldn't focus. Something about that open door bothered me, and as the minutes ticked by, I became aware of a smell, faint at first, then growing stronger. Something sweet and rotten, like flowers left too long in water. It was coming from the hallway. I got out of bed and cracked my door open. The smell was definitely stronger in the hall, and I could see the door to room 108 was now open wider, maybe 6 inches. No light came from inside, just darkness and that terrible smell. "Hello?" I called softly. "Is everything okay in there?" No answer. I knew I should call the front desk, but something pulled me forward. I stepped into the hallway in my bare feet, the carpet soft beneath me, and approached room 108. The smell was overwhelming now, making my eyes water. I pushed the door open wider and reached inside for a light switch. The room was empty, completely empty. No furniture, no bed, no curtains, just bare walls and a floor covered in dust and debris. In the center of the room sat an old record player, the kind with a hand crank and a brass horn. A record spun on the turntable, but no sound came out. The needle traced the grooves in silence. My heart pounded as I stepped inside. How could this be? The hotel's rooms were supposed to be beautifully maintained. This looked abandoned, forgotten. I walked closer to the record player, and as I did, I noticed marks on the walls, scratch marks, hundreds of them, like someone had been clawing at the plaster. The record player's crank suddenly turned on its own, winding itself with a grinding metallic sound. The music started again. That same crackling jazz from last night, but louder now, filling the empty room with distorted horns and drums. I backed toward the door, my hands shaking. This was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. As I reached the threshold, the music cut off abruptly, and I heard something else. Breathing. Slow, labored breathing coming from the corner of the room, from the shadows where the moonlight didn't reach. I ran. I didn't think. I just ran back to my room, slamming and locking the door behind me. My entire body trembled as I grabbed my phone and called the front desk. "Front desk. How may I help you?" The clerk's voice was calm and professional. "This is room 107. There's something wrong with the room across from me. Room 108. It's empty and there's something in there. A long pause. Sir, are you sure you mean room 108? Yes. The door was open, and I went inside, and it's completely abandoned and, sir, she interrupted gently, there is no room 108. The 10th floor only has rooms 101 through 107. The building's layout, there's no space for a room 108. I pulled the phone from my ear and stared at it, then looked at my door. I could see the hallway through the peephole. Directly across from me was a door with the number 108 in brass digits, and that do not disturb sign still hanging from the handle. I'm looking right at it, I whispered into the phone. Another pause. When she spoke again, her voice was different. Careful, please stay in your room. I'm sending someone up. I kept my eyes on the peephole, watching that door. 5 minutes passed, 10, then I saw the elevator operator appear, the same man from yesterday. He walked slowly down the hall, his face grave, and stopped in front of room 108. He stood there for a long moment, just staring at the door. Then he reached out and removed the do not disturb sign. As soon as he took it down, the door slowly swung closed with a soft click. He turned and looked directly at my door, at the peephole where I was watching, and shook his head slowly before walking back to the elevator. I didn't sleep that night. I packed my things and sat on the bed, watching the door, waiting for morning. When dawn finally broke, I checked out immediately, making up an excuse about a family emergency. The clerk from last night was still there, looking exhausted. As I handed over my key, she spoke quietly. Room 108 hasn't existed since 1952. There was a fire, a guest died in there, refused to leave even when the smoke alarms went off. They said he was listening to his jazz records, and when they finally broke down the door, he was gone. They sealed the room during renovations, built 107 in its place, but sometimes guests in 107 report seeing it. The door appears for them. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded and left. As I walked out of the Grandview Hotel, I glanced back at the 10th floor windows. From the street, I counted them. 7 windows, 7 rooms. But for just a moment, I could swear I saw an 8th window, dark and hollow, with a figure standing behind the glass, watching me leave. And somewhere, faint and distant, I heard the crackling sound of jazz music playing on an old record, spinning endlessly in a room that doesn't exist.